All right, let's talk about one of the most important but maybe least understood tools in a developer's entire toolkit. We're going to pull back the curtain and really demystify the compiler.
You know the feeling, right? You write your code, you hit that little run button, and poof, magic. Except it's not magic at all. It's an incredibly cool and logical process. So what is actually going on in that tiny slice of time between your click and your program springing to life?
To figure this out, we're going to follow a single, pretty simple line of code on its journey. Look at this one. Position equals initial plus rate times 60. It's perfect. It's got variables, a couple of math operators, a number, everything we need. This little guy is going to be our guide. Okay, so here's the game plan for our journey. First, we'll nail down what a compiler actually is. Then, we'll see how its job is split into two big halves, analysis and synthesis. We'll walk through each of those phases, step by step. And finally, we'll meet some of the compiler's buddies who help it get the job done.
So first things first, what is this thing really? At its absolute core, you should think of a compiler as the ultimate code translator.
And yeah, the textbook definition is actually pretty simple and elegant. It's just a program that reads another program, the one you wrote in a source language like Python or C++, and translates it into a target language, usually one the machine can directly understand. And, super importantly, it also has to report any errors it finds along the way.
It all starts with this: code that makes sense to us humans. It uses words, symbols, a structure we can follow. This is our source code.
And the compiler's entire mission is to turn that into something the computer's processor can actually execute. It's the bridge that connects our abstract human ideas to the cold, hard binary logic that the hardware runs on.
Now, this translation process isn't just one single action. It's really split into two major stages. First, there's analysis, which is all about breaking down and understanding the code. And then there's synthesis, which is about building the new program back up.
And here's where it gets really clever. The whole process is split into a front end and a back end. The front end handles the analysis part. It just focuses on understanding your code, and this is key. It doesn't care what kind of computer it's on. It's machine independent. Then the back end takes over for the synthesis part. It takes that understanding and builds the final program. And this part is totally dependent on the target machine.
So let's dive into that first half, the analysis phase. We're going to watch how our simple line of code gets taken apart piece by piece so the compiler can understand it. This deconstruction happens in three very clear steps. It goes through lexical analysis, then syntax analysis, and finally, semantic analysis. You can think of it like this. First, it checks the words, then it checks the grammar, and then it checks the meaning.
The very first thing the compiler does is just scan the text. It doesn't see code, it just sees a stream of characters. This first step, lexical analysis, groups those characters into meaningful little chunks called tokens. These are basically the nouns, verbs, and punctuation of the programming language. And here's exactly what that looks like for our code. The actual string of characters, like the word position, is called a lexeme. The compiler sees that lexeme and then categorizes it as a token. In this case, an identifier, or ID. The semicolon gets tagged as an assignment symbol. Plus is an operator. 60 is a number, and so on. See? Our code isn't just text anymore. It's now a structured stream of labeled parts. Okay, so we've got our words, our tokens. Now what? Well, next up is syntax analysis, or what's often called parsing. This is where the compiler checks if all those tokens are arranged in a grammatically correct sentence according to the rules of the language.
To figure this out, it builds something called a syntax tree. This tree is a visual map of the sentence's grammatical structure. It shows how the operators, like plus and multiply, connect to their operands, the things they operate on. And this is crucial. If the compiler can't build a valid tree from the tokens, it means you've got a syntax error, maybe a missing bracket or a semicolon in the wrong place.
So, our code has the right words, and they're in the right grammatical order, but does the sentence actually make sense? That's the question for the final step of analysis, semantic analysis. And this is mostly about checking the types of data you're using. You can almost hear the semantic analyzer asking itself, okay, does this operation actually make any logical sense? For instance, in our code, it checks to see if the variable rate is a number type. Because, you can multiply a number by 60, but you can't multiply a person's name by 60, even if the grammar is perfectly correct. This phase makes sure the logic holds up. All right, our little line of code made it. It passed all the checks,
The compiler totally understands its structure and its meaning. Now we flip to the second half, synthesis, where we see how that understanding is used to actually build the final program. And just like the analysis phase, synthesis has its own set of steps. It starts by creating a sort of generic in-between version of the code. Then, it tries to make that code even better. And finally, it generates the actual target code for the specific computer it's running on.
So first, the compiler takes that syntax tree we made and translates it into a low-level but still machine-independent format. A really common one is called three-address code. You can see how our one line gets broken down into several simpler steps. Each line now has, at most, one operator. This makes it way easier for the next stages to work with.
Now this is where the compiler gets really smart. The optimization phase scans that intermediate code and hunts for any way to make it better, faster, smaller, just more efficient. It might rearrange a few instructions or get rid of a calculation that's being done twice. It's basically an efficiency expert that tidies everything up.
And at last, we've reached the final step. The code generator takes that lean, optimized intermediate code and translates it into the actual language of the target machine. This could be assembly language, or it could be machine code directly. It picks spots in memory for the variables and figures out which hardware registers to use. This is the moment our abstract idea becomes concrete instructions for a CPU. But here's the thing. As amazing as the compiler is, it rarely works alone. It's really part of a bigger toolchain, a whole team of programs that work together to get your source code running.
You can think of these as the compiler's cousins. You've got preprocessors that do some cleanup work before the compiler even sees the code. If the compiler outputs assembly, you'll have an assembler turn that into machine code. And then you have linkers and loaders, which are the ones that take all the different compiled pieces, stitch them together into one executable file, and load it into memory to run.
So, there you have it. From a simple line of text all the way to a running program, that's the incredible journey of your code. The compiler truly is the bridge between human ideas and machine execution. Which makes you think, right? As our ideas and languages get more and more complex, how are these essential translators going to have to evolve to keep up and help us build whatever's next?